to core functions of state government. For example, we had a 200% increase in the film and music marketing budget. $95 million to the film and music marketing group. Do you see that here? Is that on the list? Do you see film and music marketing on that list? I don't. Okay? Emerging Technology Fund, $57 million more dollars. $120 million more for the Texas Enterprise Fund. This is corporate welfare. This is doing the same thing that Washington does, picking winners and losers, and they're usually pretty rotten at picking who's going to be winners. They usually end up being the losers, and guess what we pay for? So I'm going to ask you a Liberty question here. This is a question that I asked the Lieutenant Governor candidates at the Houston debate, for which now I am so infamous. A meeting. Because I asked a question like this: on what liberty principle do you base handing out tax dollars to Fortune 500 companies? On what principle of liberty can you do that? I got a blank stare. Couldn't think of one. I said, that is the answer. There is not one. Because if you say that you are a free market, liberty-minded individual, that means that you believe that a free people exercising free choice in a free market can make the decisions which will drive demand, which will cause companies to locate. But why do we pay them to do it? Because they are addicted to OPM, other people's money. Big business, and just about any business, will use your money if you'll let them. But is that on this list? We shouldn't be doing it, because it's not a free market principle. It's crony capitalism, and we need to stop it in Texas. $10 million we have spent on the make-believe problem of food deserts. Did you know that we have food deserts in the state of Texas? So our state's going to spend $10 million to study what food banks need to have. All right? Wow, I could have done that study for a whole lot less than $10 million. And we're paying $25 million a year for 10 years for Formula One racing. Do you see Formula One racing on this list? Nope. Not there. And here are some exorbitant raises for upper management. A $73,000 raise for the criminal justice director. And let me just say this. These may be just wonderful people. There may be people that would just great to have a good, vigorous political conversation with. They could probably there might be one or two out of here that'd be probably fun to go fishing with. But a $73,000 raise, a $35,000 raise for the HHS commissioner who was just on the job a few months, a $45,500 raise for the chair of the Board of Pardons and Paroles, a $35,000 raise for the state librarian, and a $27,400 raise for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Director, and that's just a few of them. So I'm going to tell you, when the state of Texas, okay, so you've seen this, and I've already told you about the 24% increase in spending. Does the state of Texas need to come to Smith County and pick your pockets to finish Toll 49? No. So do y'all understand why I'm as excited about that concept as I am? Spending down the people's savings account. The lawmakers also spent about $4 billion from the state's rainy day fund. And if the water spending is approved by voters in November, almost half of the current balance of the state savings account will have been spent as a result of this session. And the bottom line to all of this is that it makes Texas vulnerable. Does any of this that I've told you, does it make Texas stronger? Okay. Do we uphold the rule of law at all times in the state of Texas? No. There was no legislation to track the cost or lower the cost of illegals to social services. None of that ever got out of committee. In fact, it was said, this legislation will not see the light of day. No progress has been made on banning sanctuary cities to provide support for law enforcement or to fight human trafficking and the drug cartels. And I will remind you that in June of this past year, in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, there was an article that was titled, "Dallas-Fort Worth Becomes Hub for Mexican Drug Cartels." Now, Dallas-Fort Worth is not on the border. So for all of those bright lights that keep talking about how, pointing to Washington and saying, golly, that's a federal problem, have we done anything in the state of Texas to stop the magnets that draw people here? Nope. In fact, we allow hideouts. And I'm not talking about your gardener, your housekeeper, your cook, the lady that does your nails. I'm not talking about those people. If they're here illegally, they've broken the law. What I'm talking about with sanctuary cities is I'm talking about providing a place for terrorists to hide out and for the cartels to operate with immunity. And if you talk to the men and women on the ground of state law enforcement, they will tell you that they don't believe state leadership has their back. In fact, the DPS executive director said that the organized crime that is in Texas via the cartels is the #1 danger facing state law enforcement. And if it's a danger to state law enforcement, it's a danger to you. I'm going to ask you, as you think about Attorney General, you think about Governor, you think about Lieutenant Governor, you ask yourself, how did we get here? How did we get here with Dallas-Fort Worth being a hub, an operational hub for the Mexican drug cartels? How did we get here? It might make you ask some really pointed questions to candidates. I will say this, that Representative Van Taylor numerous times stopped the attempts to give driver's licenses to those here illegally, because there were several attempts of that. We won't go over all that. Let's talk about some things that we got right. DPS officers got a raise. I supported that because state law enforcement was far, far, far behind Metro PDs, the pay of Metro PDs. And we were absolutely losing some of the very best law enforcement to Metro PDs. So if you look in the context of what the dangers that we've got coming over the border into Texas, I hope you're like me and you hope that we have really got the very best law enforcement on the ground representing our state in Texas. We need that. They reduced hours for concealed handgun license renewals. I supported that very much. I did have somebody say, well, JoAnn, don't you think that's dangerous? I said, well, the Liberty response to that is, why do we have a concealed handgun license in the first place? I don't remember reading that in the Second Amendment. I will tell you that our retirement funds, the teacher retirement fund and the employee retirement system is still underfunded We made some headway with that, but at the beginning of the session, the teacher retirement fund was $27 billion underfunded. The Texas Tomorrow Fund, which is that fund if you paid into it for a child or grandchild, it is $644 million underwater. So if everybody made a run on that, they wouldn't have the money to pay it. All pro-life legislation was killed in committee and regular session. And the messy special session that made Wendy Davis a liberal Democratic rock star was completely unnecessary. And if you want to know why I believe that, I can sure tell you that, and I can show you where you can go to see it on video in the archives of the Senate. Badly handled. Campus carry and open carry was killed in committee and was never brought up for special session. Are y'all hearing what I'm saying? The TSA and smart meter bills died in committee. Eminent domain reform died in committee. There was no return to pay-as-you-go for transportation. The legislature passed an increase to their pensions because they're tied to the state district judge salaries. Cuts were made to CPRIT fund. The cuts that were made to CPRIT were reinstituted, and by the way, the Cancer Prevention Research Institute that is under criminal investigation was given a green light to start giving grants out again, just this past week. The big three in state government gave that approval. So squandered opportunities for tax relief. Remember I told you at the very beginning of this that 94% of the people voting the Republican primary said that they wanted tax relief. They wanted spending limits. We got $500 million for business, and we stopped the system benefit fund collections, which had about $832 million in that fund, I believe. But the distribution was made to low-income households who never paid into the fund to begin with. And they call that tax relief. So did you hear what I said? About $850 million in the system benefit fund, which is that fund that you pay, your utility bill has a fee on, that was supposed to go to do two things. Help the people who needed help with the needy pay their utility bills, and to also educate you. If you didn't have sense enough to know how to pick your electric provider, they were supposed to have classes to teach you how to do that. Well, you know what? There's a website that all you have to do, if you can read, you can figure out how to do it, and it didn't cost the state a thing. But anyway, that fund was one of those funds that the balance was held to balance the budget. Had been held in that account and had accumulated up to $850 million. Well, they decided to do away with the fund and to distribute the money, calling that a tax cut, tax relief. Well, the fund is being distributed to people who didn't pay into it. That sounds like Washington to me. And now we require schools that have more than 80% of their students qualifying for free or reduced breakfast to provide breakfast for free to all students. And we got no taxpayer protections, no spending limits, no appraisal caps, no zero-based budgeting. So is Texas becoming more like California? Yes, we are. That's where I get that Texifornia from. You look at the spending here, and this is on hardhatters.com. I would ask you to please start frequenting hardhatters.com. There are 3 young people who are amazing investigative reporters, and they source all of their information for their articles. They have actually taken CPRIT, that Cancer Research Institute fund, and they have looked at all of the folks who've gotten the millions of dollars in funding and traced it over to show you what statewide elected official has gotten campaign contributions from those same people. And on the Enterprise Fund and the Emerging Technology Fund, which is the corporate welfare, they've accumulated all the companies and principals who got that funding, the tax dollar giveaway, and have next to that shown you how many of those gave substantial campaign contributions to statewide elected officials. I'm just saying, inquiring minds might want to know. So Texas is going Sacramento. What does this mean to you? It means we need new leadership and we need a state business plan. We have no state business plan. We have no plan for the future in Texas that takes the needs for, rational needs for to fund public education, to fund transportation, to fund water, to fund anything, and puts it on a timetable. There's none of that. So you know what happens every legislative session? Is who's yelling the loudest down there. What particular constituency is going to yell the loudest and lobby the hardest to set the tone down there? That's not the way to operate Texas. So what does that mean to us? 2014 is coming. You need to vote wisely. And here's a new quote that I picked up that means quite a bit. In the beginning of a change, the patriot is a scarce man, and brave and hated and scorned. When his cause succeeds, the timid join him, for then it costs nothing to be a patriot. And every time I read that, I think about Ted Cruz and Mike Lee. Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and Rand Paul and Rubio in the initial fights that they were all together on against the Obamacare, standing together. They've been proven absolutely right on every bit of it. It was just a really messy argument. And it was made messy because when your team, leaders on your team come out the first day and they say, we can't win. We don't have the votes. We can't win. That gives aid and comfort to the enemy. Y'all just remember that when you're giving campaign contributions out. Okay, that's the end of that presentation. I hope after the end of that,